All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the 9th Annual MSc Science Festival. My name's Catherine. I'll be your host today. And today we're joined by Elizeth Cinto Mejia. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to listening all about birds of prey.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I'm very excited to chat with you about birds of prey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. There. And okay. Catherine, can you see it?
I can. And just real quick before you get started, I forgot to mention, I want to encourage everyone to ask questions throughout the talk, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. If you're joining us on Zoom webinar, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, feel free to ask your questions in the comments section, and I will be sure to make sure we get those answered. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so yeah, my name is Elizeth, and I am a PhD candidate at MSU. And other than being a PhD student at Michigan State, I'm also one of the outreach fellows for the Kellogg Biological Station. And here, today, I'm here to talk to you about how birds of prey hunt. Because before coming to MSU, I used to work with birds a lot. But first of all, when I say birds of prey, like, what is that, right? So we know there are a type of bird, but it's not a chickadee, or a sparrow. So birds of prey are usually what we also sometimes call hawks or raptors, and they all have this like huge talons, huge beaks, and amazing vision, and they are great hunters. But I feel like when we talk about birds of prey, maybe people don't think of owls as birds of prey, but they are also birds of prey. They just use different hunting strategies that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So this image is showing some of the birds of prey that we can see here in the US. Think about if you've seen any of these birds before. We have red-tailed hawk, which is very common here in Michigan. They're everywhere. There's a northern harrier, great gray owl, which I haven't seen many, and if you have, you're very, very lucky. American kestrels, they're really easy to see on fields, agricultural fields in Michigan. And while all of these birds share the same characteristics, they are all birds of prey and they're great hunters. It's really cool how, depending on their wing shape, they are going to fly and hunt in different ways. So now in the middle, we see the silhouette of these birds of prey. This is kind of more or less the shadow that they will leave on the ground if they were flying above us, right? And now if we only look at the silhouettes, they're all very different, right? And each type of bird of prey is going to use this wing shape to their advantage to hunt. And I'm not going to talk about all these groups. I'm just going to focus on the ones with the yellow arrows. But let's learn about how this all changes depending on the group. So the first group is buteos. And now in this group, this is where the red-tailed hawk is. And this group is where most, not all, but most of the birds that have hawk in their name are. And they all have kind of like this big but very broad wings. Now, what this means is that they're going to have a really large wing with a lot of area, and they're going to be able to flap really well and use the wind. But now, if next to you, you have a piece of paper, if not, you can do it later, but a piece of paper like this, just like a sheet. Now, let's pretend these are the wings of a red-tailed hawk. Now, if you put this piece of sheet, let's say to like eye level, and then you drop it, you'll see how the sheet falls, and it falls kind of quickly, but not that quickly, right? And you'll see in a little bit why. So, okay, these birds are amazing flyers, they're amazing hunters, but their wings are not maybe the best at flying very quick. So what do they do sometimes? Actually, they have adapted to us, to humans, and what they're going to do is that many times they're going to be perched along the road in like electric posts, waiting for prey. Every time we see kind of like carcasses along the road or like dead animals, these birds are going to love that. They're going to eat that because yes, they have really big claws and they, again, are really great hunters, but their wings are not great to be the quickest bird. So that's why they're going to be waiting sometimes. And this is what I want you to do next time you are driving somewhere, obviously being careful. Watch for these birds perched on trees or electrical poles, because you're going to see them. They're everywhere in Michigan, in the winter, in the summer, any time of the season. Now, the next group are falcons. In this group, we have birds like the American kestrel or peregrine falcon. Now, let's look at the shape of the wings. It's very different, right? They are narrow, but they're really pointy. Now, what does this remind you of? Think about it. Something that we use when we travel. Maybe a plane, right? And planes are really quick. So these birds are going to be really, really quick because their wing shape is going to let them be some of the fastest birds on Earth, like the peregrine falcon. And we can see in this video,
so for the element of
which you don't need to listen to the audio, but we can see how when they fold their wings and they start diving down, now that is the quickest bird right there. And it's all because of their wing shape. And what I want you to do now is, with the same sheet of paper that we used, let's test that. So now let's fold the sheet of paper in half. And with this half, now let's fold one of the tips and the other one like this. And then fold it like this, basically to make a plane. So now that we have a plane, now that we have our peregrine falcon, we're going to do the same we just did with the buteo, with the red-tailed hawk. We're going to drop it. And now you're going to see that because we changed the shape of the paper, now it falls a lot quicker, right? So this is how falcons do it. They're the best with speed. And one of the cool things about falcons is that you can also see them in cities. So like if you go to downtown Detroit, you'll see them there. Now, our next group is accipiters. Now, in this group, we also have some of the birds with the name hawk in it, like sharp-shinned hawk, Cooper's hawk, also northern goshawk, like the picture I have. And if you look at the shape of their wings, now these are a little bit different because they're really broad, right? Kind of like a red-tailed hawk, but they're very short, really, really short. So what is this for? How can this help them? Now let's watch this video. And this type of birds, they're also called kind of like tree hawks or forest hawks. And that's because they live in very foresty areas or sometimes in like urban environments. And they hunt, they chase their prey, but they do it in between trees. So they have to be able to do what you are all seeing in the video. make it very quickly through very small spaces. So they have these really broad wings to kind of like lift them up, but they also have to be short, right? So they're not in the way when they're going through these narrow spaces. And they are amazing at getting through anything. One of the coolest things about these birds is that you can see them do this. So I live in Lansing, and I have seen Cooper's hawks, which is a type of accipiter, chasing songbirds in the middle of downtown Lansing and doing all these wonderful things. So next time you go on a walk around your neighborhood, just look for them. And finally, with talking about the diurnal birds of prey, so the ones that we will see during the day, are harriers. This one is my favorite. Harriers, maybe they're harder to see and they're not everywhere. And if we look at their shape, their wing shape, they have really long wings, but they're not broad like a red-tailed hawk, right? They're very narrow. So how does this work? How do you think this is going to help them fly, or how are they going to hunt having this type of wings? Because they also need kind of like open spaces. But while you start thinking about that, I want you to look at their face. Okay, so they have a very strong beak. They have those eyes, kind of like a raptor, but there's something about them that makes them different than the rest of the hawks and other raptors that we just saw. So this is the bird that we just saw in the previous video. Do you think they look very similar? I mean, they're both birds, but now if I show you this, the picture of an owl, maybe, right? That looks more like it. So the cool thing about harriers is that they're not owls, but they're going to use one of the things owls use, and that's their hearing, which is something that other raptors use, but not as much. And if you see around their face, all those feathers, kind of like the owl does, they're going to use those feathers to send everything they hear towards their ears. So the way they're going to hunt is very different than the other birds of prey that we just saw. And in this video, you can see that they're going to use their long and thin wings to fly slowly, kind of like a butterfly. And they're also going to do it close to the ground because they're going to be listening. I think they're beautiful. I love seeing them. And I love them because they're kind of like a mix of both. A hawk that you will see during the day, but they also kind of look like an owl, which is why I love them. And finally, we have owls. And I wanted to talk about owls because I think they're very special. And they also have their own strategies to be the best hunters. So here we have some images of some owls that we can see in the US. I would love to know if you've ever seen an owl. If you have, you're very lucky because they're harder to see. And we have great horned owls here in the image. Those are very common in Michigan. So that's an owl you would see around here. Also eastern screech owls. They're smaller. But then there's so many other types in this country, like burrowing owl, which is a very, very small owl. Short-eared owls. They're all very similar, but very different at the same time. And one of the things that, or some of the things that make owls an owl, and I'm going to focus on great horned owls, because that's one you can see here. And just so you have an idea, this is how big they are. They're like kind of like as tall as 2 gallons of milk on top of each other together. So they're really, really big birds. And they are probably one of the best hunters out there in nature. And they're considered owls also. This is one of the characteristics because they have really big eyes for really amazing night vision. So just to have an idea, about how big their eyes are. And this is maybe harder to see because they're covered with feathers. Imagine that instead of, the eyes that we have as humans, they were as big as an apple. And you put the apples in front, like where your eyes are. That is how big they are. So huge eyes. They also need very quiet environment because they're going to use their ears. They have amazing hearing, and that's how they're going to find their prey. And also something amazing about them is that their feathers are different than the rest of the birds we saw earlier. And that makes them super quiet when they fly. If you have an owl next to you flying, you're not going to hear it. But one of the things that people get confused is when they think of owls, they think that those feathers right there are their ears, but those are ear tufts. And they're just feathers, and not all owls have them. Their ears are right there. And their ears kind of like act like a satellite antenna. And they're going to be receiving, like capturing all the sounds to their ears, and that's what makes them amazing listeners. But sometimes, even though they have amazing night vision, when they hunt, they may rely just on their hearing to hunt, which is why it's very important that they live in quiet environments. And this is something that I wanted to talk about today. Here we have a video of an experiment that was done at my previous institution in the Barber Sensory Ecology Lab. And in this case, we have a northern saw-whet owl, which is also an owl that you can see here in Michigan. Just to have an idea, they're the size of like a yogurt container. And in this case, in this video, it's all darkness. So we have night cameras, but it's all darkness. So basically the owl is only listening. The owl is perched on top. And then where we have the red circle right there, there's a mouse. So now you're going to see how the owl hunts when it's really quiet. You'll see that right away, the owl can get the mouse, right? Okay. But now, what happens when it's very, very loud? When we have, for example, noise from traffic or a factory or other infrastructure. In this case, we were playing noise from oil and gas development. Here we have the owl, and then in the red circle, we have the mouse. Now let's see if the owl gets a mouse. Nope, it misses it, right? So this is because it cannot listen to the mouse footsteps as well. And this decreases their hunting success. So this is really important because I think when we think of nature and how to protect nature and birds, noise pollution is not something that comes to our mind right away, but it's something we should think about because a lot of birds rely on a quiet environment. So with all of this, you see that even though they're all birds of prey, they're all good hunters, big beaks, claws, amazing vision. At the same time, because of the shape of their wing, they're gonna fly different and they're gonna hunt in very different ways. So hopefully, with this presentation, you learn more about birds of prey, and next time you go around your neighborhood or you drive somewhere, you start looking for them. And yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen maybe.
Great, thank you so much for that. That was awesome. Just as a reminder to everyone, feel free if you're joining us on the Zoom webinar to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. If you're joining us on the Facebook Live, feel free to drop those questions right into the comments section and I'll be sure to read them off. So we did have one question from Elizabeth. She asked, are Harriers related to owls?
So they are not, which I think is fascinating. They're more related to the other birds that we saw, like a peregrine falcon or red-tailed hawk. Um, but it's really cool to see how a bird that is not related to an owl is using the same strategies that owls are using, having those feathers there. And I have worked with harriers in the past, and it's just so amazing how they fly and how they have learned and adapted to listen to prey. Um, yeah, if you ever have the chance to see them, it's really beautiful to see them fly. It's like a giant like butterfly.
So this is a question for me. Do you have a favorite bird of prey?
Oh, that's a great question. I do love saw-whet owls because I have worked with them a lot. With that said, I don't like working at night. So, the videos that you saw from the owl, and every time someone is working with owls, that means you have to work all night with them in nature. And if you're not a night person, that's harder. But I love saw-whet owls. I think saw-whet owls and harriers, northern harriers, are my favorite.
I have another question from Erica. They're wondering, do you have a favorite hawk-specific field guide or book?
So for hawks, no. I do have a bird guide that I use, which is the Sibley one. I don't know if I can find it and then I can put it in the chat. But it's like, I don't know, it's kind of pricey. So what I do a lot is I use the online resources about birds, and I'm gonna put that in the chat. It's called All About Birds, and that's by Cornell.
Okay. We actually have the chat disabled, but if you send me an email, we can put it on Facebook, make sure everyone can find it there. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So the website, it's called All About Birds, and Cornell runs it, and it's an amazing guide. It's like, it's online, but it's great. And there's a lot of content and a lot of media if you want to know how they sound like, their behavior. It's really amazing, like maps. It's my favorite more than any book, and it's free.
Great. Yeah, I just pulled this up. This looks like an awesome resource. So I'm just going to drop this right into the chat. Find us on Facebook and should be the first post on our page. So great. Well, we have a couple minutes left, so if you have any more questions, feel free to ask them. I'm wondering, I'm hoping you could tell us a little bit about your research and your studies. What led you to the position you're in now?
Yeah, so I've always been fascinated by bird sounds. Every time I go on a walk, I love listening to birds. I think it's beautiful. And thinking about how they use all the songs and noises to communicate, made me think about how, I don't know, if we as humans, we go to a bar and it's very loud, you basically have to yell at someone for that person to hear you, right? So what about birds? If they're living near a road or near somewhere loud? And that's how I started working with noise pollution. I was doing it mostly with some birds, but because of that work and exploring all the noise pollution, that kind of like also brought me to climate change a little bit. And that's what brought me to Michigan State, climate change. So learning more about how humans have impacts on nature is what brought me here now to that. But it all started with bird sounds.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think it's really important to think about our impact as humans on the world and nature around us. On that same note, what are some things that we can do to protect birds and their environments?
Yeah, so one main thing, especially to protect birds of prey, is if you have mice in your house, do not use traps that have poison on them. Always use the ones that don't have any, the ones maybe you put peanut butter and then they close. Because what happens is that sometimes the poison doesn't even kill the mouse, or maybe it kills the mouse in a few hours. And in the meantime, a hawk is going to eat that mouse, and we're giving the poison to the hawk. So I will avoid anything that has poison to help them. And also because all this poison ends up in the water. So that's bad. And then every time you're in nature, I would just say, just don't be very loud, enjoy the nature sounds, and just respect the quiet environment. I think that's, I don't know, something small we can all do. And yeah.
That's a great call to action. Well, we have one last question from Roxanne. She's wondering about hawks. She wants to know, do hawks have different calls?
Yes, they do. And if you go to that website, to the All About Birds, you can listen to all the different calls that they have. And even like the same species of hawk, they can vary a little bit depending on where they are. For example, some of my favorite calls are owl calls. But even within owls, they all sound so different. Like a saw-whet owl is going to sound very different than a great horned owl or a pygmy owl. And I think that's also one of the really cool things, that sometimes you don't even need to see all these birds. You can just listen and know what birds you're surrounded by.
One last question. This is a great one. I want to make sure we get it answered. Elizabeth wants to know, how can we make our backyards better habitats for birds of prey? Do they use nest boxes?
So it depends of what bird of prey you're trying to attract. I would say having a lot of vegetation is good, or like trees if you want to attract more like accipiters, kind of like that Cooper's hawk that I was talking about. Red-tailed hawks, maybe like a place where they can perch. Nest box, I would say, depending on where you are, like if you live in the middle of the city, probably you're not going to get an owl nesting in there. But if you live more like in the countryside, there's a chance you can have like a barn owl or like a screech owl nesting in there. So each species is going to be very different depending on what you want to attract. And yeah, you can just, in that website, also all the information is there about how they nest. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to dig into this website more, and especially listen to all the different bird calls. That's a great resource. Thanks for sharing that.
Of course.
And thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being with me here today. Yeah, it was a pleasure, and I hope everyone has a really nice evening.
Thanks. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I encourage you to check out the rest of our events tonight and throughout the entire month of April. You can learn more on our website at sciencefestival.msu.edu. Thanks again. Have a great night.